Welcome to the second session of our midweek study of Ruth. I hope that you've had a good week so far, and I hope that you will be at our 9 a.m. fellowship service this coming Sunday. The last 2 weeks have been delightful times of rejoicing together. We've dove into the Word for just a brief time to look at God's mercies and graciousness and how He comforts and cares for us. And I would love it if each and every one of you could be there this Sunday. Now, last week in this study, we looked at the introduction of the book, the first 5 verses, and we focused on how the ancient family culture and the practice of raising crops play an integral role in the story of Ruth. With the ancient family culture, we saw that it frames the story. It provides the basic context and situation in which Ruth and Naomi find themselves. And we saw how the raising of crops, strangely enough, is one of the central elements of the story. All the most important points in the account are related to farming in some way. And as a part of this examination, we saw that the point of the book was being redeemed into the family of God. The point of the book was being redeemed into the family of God. But let's look at the text this morning. We're going to continue on with starting in verse 6, chapter 1, verse 6 of Ruth. Hear the word of the Lord, written down for us under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Ruth, chapter 1, verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant you that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, No, but we will surely return with you to your people. But Naomi said, Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters. Go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, I should even have a husband tonight, and also bear sons. Would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she said, Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So they both went until they came to Bethlehem. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, Is this Naomi? She said to them, Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. I'm sure all of you are aware of the famous sitcom and eventually movie series called The Addams Family. And what's funny about this family, what makes the whole context of it funny, is that they are just absolute wackos. They're just completely nuts. They are intentionally grim and dark and strange in every single way. It's as if Halloween became a family unit. And they often drive away any outsiders or neighbors. They drive them to the absolute brink with their very grim antics. Anytime you watch any of the old sitcom or you watch any of the movies that have been made, it is time after time after time of their neighbors or other random visiting people who are normal being absolutely driven away. But what's interesting is, and this is especially true in the movies, what's interesting is that no matter what conflict happens in that grim and strange family, they stick together. There's oftentimes extreme external pressures to break them up and pit them against one another because they're wealthy. And many of them are outright trying to kill one another at times. So you see this going on, but somehow they're still very dedicated to their family. They absolutely refuse to be separated. They stick together no matter what, even though it seems like you would want to get out of there as soon as possible. They stick together to the end. Their bonds, no matter how strange, are incomparably strong. And I think this is a good example of what we see in the family of Ruth and Naomi. Now, they're not grim and weird and wacko, but at the same time, in the light of this extreme external pressure, we see a family bond there. And this morning, I want to talk about how our family bonds are the family of faith, and how Ruth was buying into the family of faith over and above her own blood kin. So there's three things I want to bring out this morning, two of which are really heavily related to the family of faith and joining it, and the third, which is more of a function of the family of faith. The first thing is true family never changes. True family never changes. Ruth realized that the only genuine rest for her was with her genuine family, Naomi and the nation of Israel, of which she had become a part through marriage. So Ruth recognizes here that her only genuine rest can be with her only genuine family, which she knew as Naomi and ultimately the people of God, the nation of Israel. And I want to focus in on verses 9 through 15 for this, particularly verse 9. We see in Naomi's words to her two daughters-in-law that she's trying to deal fairly with them. As we discussed last week, Naomi can't provide for them with a home or much of a life at all. By following her, these girls would be signing up for a life of extreme poverty. They would be beggars in the streets. But once again, I want to focus in on verse 9 because I think it's particularly important to Naomi's intentions. If we read verse 9, look back at the word this evening. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. Now, what's significant about this line is the word rest. The word rest there in the Hebrew is not just a passing cessation of labors. Like you might say today, after you've been out working outside, I'm going to sit down and take a rest, where you're going to stop working for a little while, maybe drink a little water, whatever it might be. That's not what that word means. But rather, that word signifies a more comprehensive reality. And Naomi, by using it, is wishing them lives of peace and of prosperity. So when she says, may the Lord give you rest, she's talking about the Lord giving them the kind of peace that they would have via being married and having children. So Naomi isn't just wishing them to rest, but she's wishing them to find ultimate rest, so ultimate peace and prosperity. Like I said, obviously this comes from a husband in their context, but her intentions here are pure. Naomi isn't being a crabby old woman here. Naomi is offering up legitimate advice, and her intentions are pure. She loves these girls, and she wants them to have lives that are not marked by poverty and insecurity, but rather by security and prosperity, by peace and security. And she makes good points. The girls have no future with her, and they certainly have no husbands. When she mentions that they have no husbands, she'll get no husbands from their womb. She's bringing up the fact in the ancient world and in Israel, by legal establishment in the Old Testament law, they practice something called levirate marriage, which means that if you have two brothers and one of them dies, the other is to take up the wife of the second and have children with them, and their firstborn child with them would continue their line. This is if they have no children at all to continue the line. So this is a very, very common practice. This is something legally mandated. And what Naomi is saying is that even if I were to bear sons, be pregnant today and bear sons for you, you'd have to wait for them to become adults before you could even begin the practice of levirate marriage. So she's making good arguments. These are sensible things to say. And we see that the two girls have two different reactions to what Naomi says. And I think the reactions are quite significant. At first, both girls are very set on staying with her. Look back at the text. Verse 10, and they said to her, no, we will surely return with you to your people. So both of them are very set on going with Naomi back to Israel. But after her second attempt of persuading them, Orpah, one of the two of them, relents. And Naomi makes an almost apocalyptic argument here. In talking about her present situation, Naomi talks about how the hand of the Lord has dealt bitterly with her. The hand of the Lord has gone out against her. And just as a side note, I think this kind of comment sometimes gets called faithless by pastors. And it really isn't. When Naomi is talking about the hand of the Lord working against her, that's not coming from a place of faithlessness. It's instead coming from a place of faith. It's because that Naomi has faith that Yahweh is the one and only true God that Naomi believes all the way over in Moab that it's Yahweh who has dealt with her bitterly. It's not a wavering of her faith, but a recognition that Yahweh is the one in charge. If anyone is dealing with anything bitterly, it's Yahweh, not the gods of the pagans. It's not Chemosh, the chief Moabite god. It's not the Baals. It is Yahweh. So Orpah is persuaded, and she leaves with a goodbye kiss. That's what that means. When Orpah kisses her, originally, Naomi gives them both kisses. They both refuse. Then Orpah hears the argument again, says, no, this is a good argument. She kisses Naomi and leaves. And once again, we have another situation I think a great many pastors side on the wrong side of. They end up on the wrong side of. They tend to condemn Orpah like she was some kind of careless or unloving or undedicated daughter-in-law. But I don't think that's the case. You have to remember that Orpah was listening to the counsel of an older woman whom she loved and trusted very much. It wouldn't be disrespectful to follow the advice that an elder gave you. So I don't want to draw a distinction between Ruth being the loving, dedicated daughter-in-law and Orpah being the not loving, undedicated daughter-in-law. That's not really a fair comparison. Orpah, in her own way, probably felt she was remembering and honoring Naomi by taking up her advice. Because Naomi was correct. She was 100% correct. There was no life for them but one of poverty. And Orpah was still young enough to where she could remarry. So I don't want to side too hard on Orpah. But the real distinction between the two of them, instead of being about dedication or love, the real distinction is faith. The real distinction about them is faith. Naomi's words in verse 15 signal this very clearly. When she's talking to Ruth after Orpah has already left, Naomi says, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. So Orpah went back to her own people and to her gods. So the difference between Ruth and Orpah is not that Ruth loved Naomi more or was more dedicated. It was that Orpah was more dedicated to her pagan gods of Moab than Ruth was. Ruth already seems to have had faith. You see this from Ruth's response to Naomi, where she says, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And this is what's key here, because she doesn't seal this statement. She doesn't seal the statement with some invocation of Chemosh or Baal or any of the pagan gods of the land. Instead, she says, "Thus may the Lord," and you'll notice in your English Bible that that is all caps, Lord, so that means Yahweh, the personal name of God. "Thus may Yahweh do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me." So Ruth already has a genuine faith in her heart. She can't return to her people and her gods because Naomi is her people. She loves Naomi. And significantly, on top of that, Yahweh is her God. She can't return to her gods because they're not gods. Ruth, it appears, when she marries one of Naomi's sons, when she marries her son, she recognizes and learns that the faith of this family is the true faith, and the faith of her kin isn't. Remember, Orpah could say the same thing about Naomi being part of her family, but she couldn't say the same thing for Yahweh. So this means that Ruth recognized that her blood relatives and their religion meant nothing for her. There could be no rest for her because she would not be with her true family. Because Ruth had already had some kind of faith dwelling in her heart, because she already believed in Yahweh over and above any of the pagan gods that she saw out amongst her relatives, because she believed that, she recognized she could not rest with them. Her rest had to come among the family that she knew and she loved, and among the people who worshiped the one true God, Yahweh. Because there would be no rest for her, because she would not be with her true family, Naomi, and ultimately the people of Israel by extension, and she wouldn't be able to worship her true God, the one true God, Yahweh. I think this has significant practical implications for us. First and foremost, we see Naomi and Ruth together are traveling, and Ruth is willing to completely forsake her blood relatives for the sake of the family of God and for sake of obedience to Yahweh. And I think for us, we have to recognize that our true family is the family of God. Our greatest bonds are to them rather than to our blood kin. This means that a believer here in Texas has a greater bond with a believer in Mozambique than he does with one of his family members who's lost. Let that sink in. If you're a believer this morning, you have more in common with a believer who doesn't speak your language, who doesn't look like you, who doesn't live in under a government like yours, who doesn't have maybe even any of the same political or practical beliefs that you have, but because you share a genuine faith in Jesus Christ, you have more in common with that person than you do with a family member who doesn't know him. No matter how much practically you might have in common with that family member. The truest family on earth is the family of faith. Now, obviously, we all want to be in a situation where our physical family, our earthly family, is also all our brothers and sisters in Christ. We all want to be in that situation. But that's not always the case. And Jesus gives us strong words about this in Luke chapter 14, verse 26. He says that we have to be willing to forsake everything for the sake of following him. And he specifically names family. He says we have to hate our father and mother and our brothers. What he means is we have to be willing to sacrifice our relationships with them for the sake of following him, if that's what's necessary. And Ruth is a very early testimony to this truth. Following Yahweh often means leaving your kin behind. But you should take heart. Just as we see here in this book, as we go through it, that Ruth can leave the paganism of her kin and enter into the family of God, so also can your lost family members leave whatever their paganism is and enter into the family of God themselves. So stories like this should, one, make us aware that this is the situation, continually remind us that our family of faith is the most integral family in our lives. But two, stories like this should drive us to continually pray that God would give our lost relatives the insight of Ruth, that they may abandon their old gods and the things of this world for the sake of Christ. Ruth was willing to abandon her old family's gods and all the things of the world that she'd known for the sake of someone she loved. Ultimately, because faith had begun to take root in her heart. We should continually pray for that spirit amongst our relatives. So we see here in this book, first of all, true family never changes. Second of all, transformation must be comprehensive. What we talked about just a second ago leads into this point naturally. Ruth could not just change a little for the sake of following Naomi and ultimately following Yahweh. Her transformation must be comprehensive. Ruth had to completely change. Joining the family of God requires the complete rejection of the old things that ruled over you and an embrace of the one true God in their place. Now, I mentioned Ruth already had the root of faith in her heart. That doesn't mean we can necessarily say that Ruth had a well-informed faith, that Ruth understood the Bible, or that Ruth really understood who Yahweh was completely. But Ruth did have faith that in the basic truth that Yahweh was the one and only true God, which at this time in history is the main integral central thing that Israel believes over and above what others do. And what we can see is that this is genuine faith because Ruth is willing to completely change everything about her life for the sake of following Naomi and ultimately of following Yahweh. She wants to keep her beloved family together, and that includes joining the family of faith. And Ruth makes a pretty significant commitment in her proclamation here. Let's look back at the text, verse 16. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you, for where you go I will go, and where you lodge I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me." That's a major commitment. And when you look at each of her statements, you can see that each and every one of them slowly ratchets up the commitment from Ruth. Look at them one by one with me this evening. Where you go, I will go. She's going to follow her absolutely everywhere. There's nowhere Naomi's going to go that Ruth won't go with her. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Meaning, Ruth is going to stop everywhere she stops. So it's not just that her destinations are the same, but their actual stopping places are going to be the same. Ruth is not going to leave her side, even if Naomi decides to lodge at a certain place at a certain time. Your people shall be my people. I'm going to take on your family and abandon mine, which in an ancient cultural context where family community is so significant, that's a big deal. Joining another family is a big deal. And your God, my God. We just talked about this. Ruth's willing to take on the God of Israel, partly because she already believes in him. But secondly, because she recognizes that that belief is part of the thing that joins her to Naomi, over and above just the family tie of having married her dad's son. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So Ruth goes to the end of saying, I'm not even going to abandon you, even when you die and I could have the right to go anywhere. So this is not even one of those deals where Ruth would stay with Naomi until she dies and then go off on her own. Ruth is saying, I'm so dedicated to you and to your God and to your people that when we end up, wherever we end up, I'm going to go there with you. And I'm going to stay there with you. And when you die there, I'm going to be so much part of your family, and the bond between us is going to be so strong, I couldn't bear to leave wherever you're going. And when I die, I'm going to be buried right next to you. And the final kind of cherry on top of her ratcheting this up is, thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. So not only does she make this big commitment, but she ratchets it up by swearing an oath there at the end, meaning basically, may the Lord kill me before you if I choose to leave you ever. That's a big commitment. That's a big commitment. And Ruth is willing to make that commitment because her transformation was complete. She recognized that for her to become a member of Naomi's family, truly, she couldn't just move there with her. She didn't even just have to take up her God, but she had to make the commitment to be like a member of the family who was going to stay there until they died. And I think this idea this transformation and the completeness that's required there just marries so easily into the New Testament with our Christian faith. There's no room for partial members of the family of God. Ruth had to put away all of the features of her old life and give herself up for the sake of Naomi to make it to Israel. Ruth did not make a light commitment, but rather she recognized everything about her life had to change. There was no going back. And that's the kind of commitment we make when we follow Christ. When we follow Jesus, when we repent and we believe in Him, we don't just make a statement that changes us temporarily. We don't just make a statement to make a statement and don't change at all, but rather we engage in a complete transformation of our lives. Sometimes that transformation, it doesn't seem that significant. Perhaps you're from a family that was Christian and you were raised to believe and act like a Christian, and the moment when you had faith in your heart for the first time, when you experienced genuine faith, you were already in a pattern of at least external Christian obedience. There was still a radical transformation inside of you because now you were empowered to obey. You had genuine faith, and it was genuine obedience. We must be willing to sacrifice everything for our family of faith. That's part of that transformation as well. When we look at Ruth's example here, she let everything be changed about her for the sake of her family, ultimately the family of faith. We recognize this ultimately as a benefit to us because we know at the end of the story, Ruth is in the genealogy of Jesus. So Ruth sacrificed everything for the sake of us, for the sake of our family of faith in a very significant way. And that's a big part of Ruth's example to us. She shows us what genuine change and transformation looks like, what it genuinely looks like to abandon the old life and to take on the new one. So, our transformation must be complete. Absolute and complete total change. And the final thing, the third point we're going to talk about this morning, is more about part of the function of the family of faith. And that is talk about calamity. Talk about calamity. The family of faith is a place where we should be open about our sorrows. This will just be a very brief point. But we see in the text, when Naomi arrives in Bethlehem, she urges the people. We see that the women come up to her, and in verse 20 she says, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi's a little bit overdramatic here, but this is pretty common in kind of Old Testament drama. Changing your name due to your circumstances is a very common thing in the Old Testament period, and Naomi's being a little bit of a dramatic person here with this pronouncement. But, while it's one thing to be open and honest about your sorrows and troubles, it's another to request that people call you by a different name because of it. However, Naomi is genuinely expressing her sorrow. What's interesting about the name change is that Naomi means pleasant. Naomi means pleasant. And she would argue that when she had left Israel, she was pleasant. But she changes to Mara, which means bitter. So when she says that the Lord dealt bitterly with me, she means He made me Mara. He made me bitter. And while this is dramatic, Naomi is well within her rights to speak this way, and particularly with her family. And I think Naomi gets a little bit of a bad rap here. There are other reasons and there are plenty of them, to think that Naomi is not necessarily a great person in the context of the rest of this book. However, this is really not one of them. Naomi speaks candidly and frankly with her neighbors here, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, I think that's somewhat instructive to us. Once Naomi is back in the presence of her family, she openly and candidly expresses her sorrow. And I think we, as 21st century Americans, could really learn from this. When we're with our family of faith, we have to be open and willing to express our sorrows with them. Because when we're not, at the end of the day, we're depriving our family of faith an opportunity to care for us. And secondly, we're shutting down what's going on inside of us in a way that we are not helping ourselves in any way. Naomi's right to share her sorrow with her friends and relatives. And the family of faith is the exact place for God's people to share these sorrows. When we're in church, we're with a group of people who are uniquely equipped to understand our sorrows and to help us with our grief. We need to take advantage of that. The family of faith is the exact place where we should be open to share our sorrows. We are here to support one another in times of need. Naomi went back to her physical family in hopes that there would be some relief there. And we go to our spiritual family for that same kind of relief. Now, this doesn't mean that we mope around with a constant sadness, but it does mean that we don't gain anything from refusing to share our burdens with one another. So often when you see sorrow in the church, there's two things happening that are really negative. The first thing is there are people who are unwilling to bear anyone else's burden. And the second thing is that there are people who are unwilling to let anyone else bear their burden with them. Both of these things are foreign to the people of God and foreign to the purpose of the church. We are supposed to talk about our calamity. Speak about your sorrow. It's part of your family's duty to you to help you bear that burden. So when we look at these first several verses of Ruth, when we are diving into the story completely, we see three primary things. One, true family never changes. Ruth was a true member of Naomi's family. She followed her God and she loved Naomi. Two, transformation must be comprehensive. Transformation must be comprehensive. Ruth was willing to abandon everything about her former life and her former existence for the sake of love for Naomi and ultimately out of faith in God. Finally, talk about calamity. Be willing to be open with your family of faith with your sorrows. It's through these channels that we ultimately are able to help heal one another.